Chapter 12. Antebellum Culture and Reform. The Romantic Impulse. Romanticism was basically the idea of liberating the human spirit, and there was also the expansion of American nationalism. The paintings during this time period captured the wonder of the wild landscape and nature, particularly the Hudson River School, which was the first great school of American painters in New York. There was development of a distinctive American literature, starting with James Fenimore Cooper. He combined adventure, suspense, and the great American wilderness. His writings were linked to important ideas, such as natural inner goodness of man and a fear of disorder. Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass was a part of American democracy. He expressed the spirit of the individual. Herman Melville's Moby Dick was a surge for personal fulfillment, and the search for personal fulfillment can not only liberate but also destroy. Edgar Allan Poe talked about going beyond the confines of intellect and into the spirit and emotions. There was a lot of pain and horror in his writings. In Southern literature, there was a defense of the Southern way of life. The Transcendentalists basically said, okay, we need a liberation from understanding and a cultivation of reasoning. The reasoning was the innate capacity for expression of emotion, and understanding was a use of intellect as imposed by society. They were also big on the divinity of the individual. Ralph Waldo Emerson was a nationalist and writer who promoted self-fulfillment and American cultural independence. Henry David Thoreau suggested responding to instinct instead of conforming to society. And one of his major ideas was civil disobedience, which was the public refusal to obey unjust laws. There was a fear of invasion into nature for economic gain. They believed in an essential unity between humanity and nature. Brook Farm was a utopian community in which everyone gets an opportunity for self-realization. However, individualism gave way to socialism, and it gradually dissolved. Nathaniel Hawthorne, who lived in Brook Farm, wrote that egotism is the heart of human misery. New Harmony, also known as the Village of Cooperation, was an economic failure. Margaret Fuller questioned gender roles. So the United Community was a liberation of women from traditional family bonds. It was communal living as well. The Shakers were completely celibate, and to get more members, they had to get volunteers to join. They also believed in gender equality. The Mormons, founded by Joseph Smith, which doctrines include polygamy, secrecy, a rigid society. They went from Nauvoo to Salt Lake City to a permanent settlement. Brigham Young was the person who led them there. They had no individual liberty. There was a rigid social structure, and people seek to find security and order in that community. Remaking society. Protestant revivalism, individuals are capable of obtaining their own salvation. It's not just to be like, God chooses all these people. No, the individual can gain salvation. The Burned Over District in New York was called that because an economic boom caused social changes and a lot of offshoots of religious orders. Charles Grandison Finney, revivalism in this area, he crusaded against personal immorality. So alcoholism is more widespread in this time period than in future ones. So there was the temperance crusade against drunkenness. It became divided in purpose. Should this be by law, or should this be by personal conscience? It was a way to curb disorder brought by immigrants who drank as a ritual. With this remaking of society, there was an interest in new theories of health and knowledge. The water cure was thought to improve health, therapeutic but not a cure. Vegetarian meals instead of meat, because they thought excess and luxury were evils. Phrenology was that a person's skull is indicator of character intelligence. Like each part of the head represents a certain part of intelligence. The absence of basic knowledge about disease limits the development of medicine during this time period. Anesthetics were developed from experimentation by dentists rather than medical doctors. However, traditional physicians mistrust innovation and experimentation. Education as a way of imposing a social order. Horace Mann reorganizes the Massachusetts school system. There was more growth throughout the states toward public education, though it varied widely in different regions. U.S. is one of the highest literacy rates in the world. 94% of the North was literate, and 80% of the white Southerners were literate. The benevolent empire, in which the blind and handicapped could find inner strength and wisdom. There were asylums for criminals and mentally ill, reform and rehabilitation for them. However, they soon became overcrowded and rehabilitation ideal was lost. So there grew houses for orphans, women, poor, etc., helped lead them to become productive citizens of society. However, the purpose of the Indian reservation reform was protection from whites and develop assimilation. There were a creation of a feminist movement in which men and women are created equal. Women can do what men can do, basically. At the Seneca Falls meeting, the reformers came up with a document that rejects the idea that men and women should be in separate spheres. It was called the Declaration of Sentiments, and it was largely based on the Declaration of Independence. Many Quakers were involved because of their belief in gender equality. However, the progress to their goals was limited. Some women overcame social barriers. And another thing is that women's rights are secondary to the issue of slavery during this time period. Which brings us to slavery, the crusade against slavery. So there was the American Colonization Society, which basically they said, okay, let's move slaves back to Africa. But this didn't really work because there was not enough funds and not enough support for this to become. There was the creation of the nation of Liberia in Africa, but it did not move a significant number of slaves. William Lloyd Garrison forms an anti-slavery newspaper called The Liberator. He demanded immediate abolition of slavery rather than gradualism, such as many abolitionists suggested. The American Anti-Slavery Society increased dramatically in its membership. However, the prejudice toward blacks increases when they are free. They're sometimes forced back into slavery, even if they are free. The free blacks are committed to abolition because their position isn't good as long as slavery exists. Frederick Douglass, an escaped slave, purchased his freedom. He is known as the greatest African-American abolitionist. However, there was opposition to the abolitionist movement in the North as in the South. It wasn't like all the North was, yay, abolitionism. Some of the Northerners didn't support it. They saw it as a threat to the existing system. There was an escalating wave of violence against abolitionists. Some members of the abolitionist movement take a moderate stance, while others, like Garrison, become more extreme. Garrison even suggested expelling slave states from the Union. Some of the moderate ways were moral suasion, was an attempt to convince slaveholders that the institution was sinful. This got no results. Political action, let's induce the North and government to aid the cause. The Amistad case occurred, in which the slaves in a Spanish vessel take it over and attempt to return to Africa. However, the American Navy holds the ship. The Supreme Court declares the Africans free in this Amistad case. Free soilism, in which the Liberty Party founded, it supported keeping slaves out of the territories, but not out of the existing states. The abolitionists are driven to violence and propaganda, such as Harriet Beecher Stowe, who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a major force in exposing the issues of slavery. And America continues to divide over the issue of slavery. That's for today. Maggie. This is my dog. Maggie, come here. Come here. Really? Come here. Come here. Just walk over here trying to get me to pet you, huh? Say hi to the camera? Don't quite understand what a camera is, huh? Okay. Adios.